speaking of your own identity, when you don't know who you are, especially when you're in an abusive relationship, the person who's doing the abusing has stripped you of any identity to stand up for yourself.
Right, right, right. So who I thought I was through his lens.
Exactly.
And so when I talk to people, who are thinking about getting out of a relationship, a marriage, a business partnership, whatever it is, I never take anyone's situation lightly, because even for me, when I made the decision, like, okay, I am going to leave him, I am going to do this, there was a lot of preparation to getting to that point, and then a lot of preparation to stay committed to the decision.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've said so many times to people, like, any kind of big decision like this, it's never making the decision one time. It's making the decision thousands of times over and over and over again.
Yes.
That is what really causes the change.
Welcome to the Enlighten Up podcast, where I am going to take you into a deep exploration of what it means to exist in this current reality. We are going to raise your vibes, open your mind, expand your heart, and dive deep into the wondrous mysteries and possibilities of this lifetime. There's been a spiritual catalyst that has set in motion the awakening process of many across the globe to return to the knowingness of self and unite what has been separated. Together, we're going to bring light into that darkness. We're going to remember the joy of living. But most of all, we're going to turn up the volume of our own eternal power and do the thing we're here to do. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Enlighten Up podcast, and I couldn't be happier to introduce you to a very new friend and CEO, founder of the company GLOWE, Whitney Kenter, and I met at a very interesting dinner party over the summer from a mutual friend, and it was like the stars aligned. We were even sitting next to one another at dinner.
Really?
Whitney, welcome to the show. It's so good to have you on the podcast now, and we can have a very in-depth conversation of all the things you and I love to talk about.
I am so excited to be here, and you were right. It was Kismet that brought us together, and I'm so excited to have this conversation with you today.
I know. It was really interesting because, as you know, we all got to know one another at this dinner party. Your husband was paying attention to what I was saying. He's like, you and my wife have a very similar stories.
So true.
So we have a lot in common, but what I love so much about what you're doing is you're kind of like a little maverick, a maverick in, let's just call it normal disguise. Okay. Kind of really breaking down this myth that spirituality and personal and business must be separate from a spiritual sense. And that couldn't be further from the truth, is what I get from you.
So true. Yes. And I know you believe that as well. So we're here to tell the story.
I know. So, okay, let's dive into the really juicy stuff and let my audience know just, a little bit about your story and how you kind of got here, because I find that so much of our, soul's missions, if you want to use those words, comes from a very, let's call it nonlinear path of pain and breakdowns that get us to this point of realization of what we're actually meant to do. And I don't think when you first started out that you ever thought you were going to be in this position.
No,
No.
no. And
Okay.
I mean, I started, life on a farm in the middle of nowhere, just kind of growing up. It was an amazing experience to grow up in that environment. But then moving to a city for high school and all of that was part of it. And not really having a clue what I wanted to do with my life, let alone what my soul's purpose was or why I was here or any of that. And so I think that your description of this path being very nonlinear, and I would say for the first 38 years, somewhat accidental, like you're just kind of stumbling from thing
Yes.
to thing. I mean, for me, I stumbled into accounting in college only because my dad told me it would be a great foundation. I could always have a job.
Mm.
Yet I'd been drawn to things like psychology and teaching and all of these things that now I utilize very much in my career. But, this foundation that you needed to learn something so, quantitatively driven and structured and all of that. And so I did that, and they almost immediately realized that in my first job that this was not going to be a path for me. But again, kind of with that still big question mark. Okay, that's great. This doesn't feel right, but what do I do? And so I ended up starting to work with a lot of executives that were CEOs of large companies, and I was working on their taxes and their planning, personal planning and things. And all of our conversations kind of steered back to what's the meaning of all this? What does all this wealth mean? What does it mean for my family? So very quickly got into the human behavior side, not because I was trained in it, but because the conversations were happening naturally. So ended up making a really amazing career out of blending this, you know, very quantitative, structured, very well-known way of planning and all those things with this behavioral side of the business, the wealth management business. And it was really fascinating. And it took me until when I was 38 and I'd been, I would say, on the hamster wheel, right? I'd been on the corporate ladder, I'd been moving and going and on the boards and doing all the things and having kids. And it looked like I was on a very linear path to success, whatever that meant. And I mean, I got stopped in my tracks within a 2-week period of each other. I had 3 friends approach me almost like an intervention to kind of check in with me, but also hold up a mirror and say, I think you don't even see that you're in an abusive marriage. And we're worried about you. And I think that first awakening was, first of all, really hard because, in my mind, I was a really smart person and I was doing all the right things. And I had disconnected from self so much. I didn't see that the things that were happening in this environment were really damaging
It,
and really not healthy in so many ways.
yeah. So, okay. So when you were saying just before you found out, like just before you were approached by 3 friends who were letting you know, hey, we're worried about you. And
Yeah.
you felt like you were on this linear trajectory, this path of success, all, signs pointing ahead. And
Yep.
I felt in my, like, as you were saying that, I'm like, yeah, the linear path of success that has been designed for us by this world, right? By the
Mhm.
consensus of society is
Yes.
also the path to that success is also the path to our soul's death, so to speak. It's what it feels
Oh, a
like. It
hundred
feels
percent.
like we're dying
That's what it
inside.
felt like to me. Yeah. And I don't even think I was conscious about it because I was just on the track.
Yes.
I wasn't pausing enough to say, how do I feel about this promotion, this whatever? How do I feel? And it wasn't, there wasn't a moment really before that to stop, because there was always something I was trying to accomplish or achieve or whatever. There was always another thing. And so there was very little feeling happening, but there was a whole lot of chasing and achieving and things like that, which just meant that I was getting farther and farther away from myself, right? Because I'm sure if I could go back in time, I'm sure my body was trying to give me signs. I was trying, and I just probably just kept ignoring, because you just jump right back on
Yeah.
the path and keep.
And just when we think we have life figured out, especially if we're on that path where our soul is on a slow death trajectory, something gets thrown in, a nice monkey wrench gets thrown in, like your three, we'll call them friends, who approach you saying, we're very concerned about your safety in your marriage. Like if it's abusive, then they're concerned about your safety.
Right. And it was a huge awakening. And then I think as I moved forward, into this, there had to be this, acknowledgement that yes, this was happening. And, I had to grieve a lot of things. And there was a lot of emotions at that intersection. And also this extreme fear about, well, if I'm not this, and this isn't good, and this doesn't feel right, then who am I, and what do I want? It just was, it's like it opened up so many possibilities. It was absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
And all that I knew was I was a mom of 3 kids, and I was in a company that I loved and was co-creating. And so I had those two things, but that didn't tell me anything about my identity. Those were all roles that I was playing.
Yes.
But it still didn't shine the light on who I was and why I'm here.
Yeah.
So it didn't tell me anything about my soul.
So, okay, let's pause for a second. You get approached by 3 people. What was it like for you to, in such a short period of time, have 3 people tell you we're worried about you? Like, what kind of was going on within you?
Well, what was interesting about it was the first person I'd known for the longest, and I'd probably known him probably 8 years. And so, and also I think he was kind of, he was older than me, and, I really respected his wisdom in all kinds of ways. And so, and it wasn't like we had these types of deep conversations normally. And so it was very much I trust him. I, really do honor him and his experience and our friendship and everything. So it was this very, and I remember that he was the first one. And I was like, oh, I'm fine. Oh my gosh. No, it was just, and the things that he'd seen that he brought up to me, I made excuses for, and I kind of put it away. And then another friend that was fairly new, but I also really admired, and I really enjoyed getting to know him in the past, I think it was maybe a year or so. And he called me and asked me to go to lunch. And I was thinking, that's really odd. It was during the week too, because normally I would just see him on the weekend. And and we were sitting down, and he said, I just want to bring up something that's kind of uncomfortable. And I don't know you that well, but I just need to share. And it was really him that I think for some reason his reflection back to me kind of cut straight through all my excuses, and for some reason it made me start to see things differently. So I don't know, whatever it was about him and our relationship being fairly new and my respect for him, and I don't know what it was, and maybe it was just because it was the second time.
Yeah.
In a short period of time. And I thought, am I missing something? And then by the third one, it was like, oh my gosh, what I need to pause.
Yeah, because the universe is speaking
So
through them.
Totally,
Yes.
totally. And I didn't have that language back then. I didn't have a strong spiritual practice. I grew up, I would say, modestly in a spiritual household, like not really. And so I didn't have that foundation that I have now that would seem, the signs would be so obvious to me with this awareness and the perspective that I have now. But back then I didn't use those words. I wouldn't have said that. It was more just, okay, wow, I'm really missing things if this many people in success of our, and then I was thinking, oh my gosh, how courageous of them to bring this up to me,
Well, I mean,
and so I
that's
was
one
really
way.
honoring.
Yeah, that's one way of looking at it. There are some people that could get angry at the messenger for disrupting the comfort of the situation. When I say the
That's
comfort, I
true.
just mean
That's
let's
true.
not rock the
Yeah.
boat.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, I don't remember ever being angry with any of them. I was definitely shocked. I was definitely in denial, making excuses. I was doing all the things to kind of protect myself, and stay safe. But, I mean, I think it was kind of one of those things where even though I wouldn't have said, okay, this is definitely the universe trying to tell me something, I think it was definitely like, okay, well, this isn't happening, out of the blue for these three people to be coming to me. I clearly am not paying attention. And so it just set off, it set things in motion for me that I'm really grateful for,
Mhm.
because it really was the beginning of this exploration back to myself. I mean, I had a ton of healing to do from all of the, all the trauma related to all of that, but it was more, and as I dug into myself more and learned more, it was definitely like, okay, this makes sense. This is part of what I'm here to learn, taking the action steps to find my way back to myself, but also to get out of a bad situation. Because to your point, even if it's a bad situation, it doesn't matter. It's still known.
Mhm.
And, to be honest, it was one of those things where as I started working with a therapist and, different people along the way, from an outsider looking in, you start to go through the the situation, and it's very, from an objective perspective, it's like, well, obviously you need to leave.
Mm.
It seems so black and white,
Yes.
and yet
Mhm. When you're in it.
it's complicated, and so
Mhm.
there's no, I had to really work hard at at getting more clarity about who I am, so that then I could begin to take the steps to exit, to, change my circumstances, to all those things. And so it was really, um, while it might have seemed simple and straightforward to a lot of people, it really wasn't. Because I think for me, I went through this whole thing of, well, if I'm not that,
Mhm.
if this isn't the way that I want to be treated, then who am I? And how do I show up differently so I don't do this again? I mean, there's just so many questions
Yeah. And then
about,
also
that.
too, speaking of your own identity, when you don't know who you are, especially when you're in an abusive relationship, the person who's doing the abusing has stripped you of any identity to stand up for yourself.
Right, right, right. And so who I thought I was through his lens.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
And that's what, a part of what contributed to the dynamic, and which is what makes, and so when I talk to people, who are thinking about getting out of a relationship, a marriage, a business partnership, whatever it is, I never take anyone's situation lightly, because even for me, when I made the decision, like, okay, I am going to leave him, I am going to do this, there was a lot of preparation to getting to that point, and then a lot of preparation to stay committed to the decision.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've said so many times to people, like, any kind of big decision like this, it's never making the decision one time. It's making the decision thousands of times over and over and over again.
Yes.
That is
So
what really
important.
causes the change.
Yes. So
Because I
important.
can't tell you how
Oh,
many nights I second guessed and thought I should just go back and all these things. And, it's all kind of part of the process of exiting that type of dynamic. But I don't minimize it in anyone's personal situation, because it really is, it's a commitment thousands of times to the same decision. And even though your mind can tell you this makes so much sense,
yeah.
how do you not see it?
Oh
It's
gosh. And
really
so many people don't realize the importance of what you're saying right now. And I've said this so many times on this podcast and on my channel, that don't minimize your little choices that you consistently make every day, because that's the change that's going to eventually stick.
yes. Yes.
It's not that we don't have these grand gestures of change every now and then, but the real solid change that really sticks around and allows you to continue in brand new ways are the little consistent changes you make every moment of the day. Because it's not just daily,
Right.
it's throughout the
No,
day.
totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Well, and then, I mean, so, you create this first wave of awareness, right? And then you accept it, and then you learn, and you keep moving forward in
Mm-hmm.
your journey. And, then all of a sudden I started to recognize other relationships that I had in my life where I was kind of allowing the same thing, which was, again, keeping me disconnected from myself, because I was morphing into this person's version, and I was tolerating all kinds of, talk about violation of boundaries and disrespect and all these things. I mean, so for me to change, it wasn't enough, to your point, for me to leave a marriage, although that was a gigantic piece.
Mm-hmm.
Then it was kind of the rest of the cleanup of my life, of saying, oh my gosh, I've been doing this for so long with so many people in my life. I get it. I mean, to say that I was contributing to it is an understatement, because I was choosing to allow these people to disrespect, abuse, I mean, all the things. And so it's not just changing the one thing. It is coming to that realization that, there are many things that I needed to change in order to kind of stop the patterns, I guess,
Yeah.
from happening.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And as you're saying that, I'm realizing there was a major pattern that started in your life, because you literally, before you got to this point of where you are now and your company Glow and what it's representing and doing, which I love, you talked about going through 3 divorces in your life. And this one that you're talking about right now is really the second one.
It is, yeah. So
Because
I'd done it before, but I didn't have this awareness.
yeah, and so okay, so
But
we're
yeah,
talking about a patterns of abuse where you are not really standing up for yourself, you're not fully being true to you. What was it like in the
mhm,
okay, what was the first situation like then, going back before this divorce takes place?
yeah. So, I mean, the first was my dad was extremely emotionally abusive and controlling. And so, my upbringing was such that, I began to think that, to be seen, to be loved and all of this, I had to conform to the idea of what he, and to some degree my mom, thought that I should be.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, the disconnection from myself started happening very early, because it was like up until age 7 or 8, which I have vivid memories of, being kind of a younger but similar version of who I am today back then.
Mhm.
And then it was like this slow, I don't know, masking of who I was, because it was like, oh, they don't like that, so I'm going to put this part of my mask on, and oh, they don't like that, I didn't get positive response, so I'll stop doing that. So I'll become more agreeable, more susceptible to narcissists, and all of the behaviors that come along with that, and just kept started getting farther and farther away from myself. Probably around age 11 or 12 is probably when I started um, that true disconnection from self. And so when I got to high school and everything, all I could think about was just getting out. And it wasn't, the only thing I wanted was, I wanted independence. It was almost like I just wanted to be free, which is not too terribly different than teenagers in general. But for me, it just seemed particularly important, because I thought, I just want to go figure out who I really am. And so, so I, for the most part, I mean, kind of divorced my family right after, like the day after high school graduation. I was like, I'm moving, I'm going to go get a job. I'm going to, figure out how to make money and pay for my college, and didn't ever really go back home after that. And so it was this, I'm going to put up a boundary here. And I mean, I think at the time, given my maturity and everything, I probably was more like, I just want to get out. I want to run away. But
Mhm.
it was, in hindsight, it was definitely more of a divorce. Like, nope, I'm going to stand up for myself, and I'll just go figure it out on my own,
Yeah.
you know. And then meeting my ex-husband in college, the pattern just repeated itself. I had like a year and a half where I felt like I was doing a really good job figuring out who I was. And then he enters my life, and all of a sudden things kind of go backward. And the same kind of profile of charismatic and, all of those things, it must have been just so familiar that I was like,
Mhm.
oh, wait, you know, and so that, that's kind of, you're right. It was the second turn, my second opportunity to learn my
Yeah.
soul,
And this
my
is
soul
why,
had
like,
a lot of,
even as you say, he was so familiar, like it was so familiar. This is why I've said so many times on like a lot of my Instagram posts and stuff, when it comes to relationships, especially like dating, I'm like, date the unfamiliar, because the familiar isn't always safe. Just because something's familiar, we equate it with safety, but it doesn't necessarily mean it is, especially if the familiar is not good for us.
right, right,
And,
exactly.
yeah.
So
And we
true.
all go through, like, there is
Yes.
not one person who doesn't go through this lesson.
Yeah. Well, and there's no, I don't know. I feel like you're here to experience challenges.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to have these types of breakthroughs or these growth opportunities without exploring the pain and all of that. And not that I necessarily wish pain on anyone, that's not the point. But, from a development standpoint and everything, I'm so grateful that I went through everything that I went through, because
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I have learned so much
Yeah.
um, that I wouldn't have experienced if I hadn't left in 2011. I would not. I mean, I can't even imagine where I would be right now.
Mm.
Nowhere close
Yeah.
to where I am
Yeah.
today.
So, okay. So you've gone through a divorce with your family. You're now divorced your husband, and you're now realizing there are other people in your life that you need to divorce,
Yep. Yep.
because it's the same,
Um,
it's the familiar pattern showing
right.
itself. Yeah,
Right.
because this is the
Exactly.
thing. if it shows up in one area of your life, it's likely showing up in other areas of your life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because you can't, and we talk about this and to your intro, we can't hide for very long. We can't hide for very long who we really are. Like eventually it will come out. And so for me, straddling, different pieces of me and like showing up to be this version when I'm at home, and then I show up in a professional environment and I show up to be a different person, at some point there had to have been a reckoning, right? Because it's very exhausting to keep
Yes.
up, all these different things and trying to be this person's version of what they want me to be and this person's version and this person's. Whew, it's much easier to just be me
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah. The
It's a
integrated
lot less
one.
exhausting. Yes, exactly. It's like, oh,
Yes.
wait, hold on. If I can figure out who I am and then align to that, seems pretty simple, but yeah, it's hard to get there for sure. But
So
the
what,
third one was,
yeah.
as I'm evaluating all of this, and, I mean, I'm talking, it took me another 10 years for the third divorce. So actually kind of interesting. So 17, 38, and 48. So some decades in between there. And realized that, this company that I had been so passionate about building, that instead of doing it on my own, wanting a partner and everything, I basically entered a similar relationship with a business partner. And and that was really hard. And so for a long time, I kept thinking, well, it's almost like when people say they don't get a divorce because of the kids.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of felt like I wasn't exiting the business because of the business and the kids, all the people that I felt so responsible for.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was just time after doing so much more healing and, getting more clues. I think you talk about this a lot. I mean, there's a lot of different places that you can go to gather data about yourself and your soul's purpose and your journey and things that, if you choose to view it as data, like I did, once I started um, down that path of exploration of self, it was becoming really clear on the things that, not only the things that I needed to learn and do, but also kind of where my ultimate journey, like that I've started late 40s and into my 50s, um, where I'm meant to be. And so it all kind of started to fall into place, but it did, just like it took me a while to kind of build up the courage and I don't know, the resilience, I guess, to make the decision to leave um, my ex-husband. It took me a while to prepare and, get clear enough and strong enough to exit a business that no longer was serving me. So,
This is tough too, because when there's money involved and, and all that kind of stuff, it gets really sticky. I was in a business partnership with someone, and this is so great. I'm glad we're kind of talking about this, because I don't think people realize that across all the different kinds of relationships that you can have, the problems just don't show up in your intimate partnerships. Like if it's showing up in your
right.
intimate, it's likely showing up in your friendships. It's likely showing up in your family. It's likely showing up in your business or your work environment.
Yeah.
Like it's showing up everywhere. And I
Yeah.
remember realizing that, my business partner, her and her husband had put in quite a substantial amount of money compared to the amount of money I had been able to put in. And, but I also noticed that even though we were 50-50, I was the one doing I was like, I could see that she wanted to be the brains and I was to be the brawn. And I'm like, no, 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 no. It's not going to work that way. And so the
Right.
problem is that when you have an ideas person, who's very creative and had some great ideas. But every time it was time to execute, wait, new idea. What about this? And it
Oh
was
yeah.
really sabotaging the growth
Yeah.
of the business and where it could possibly go in the direction. And it was just muddling everything up. And I'm like,
Yeah.
and I stayed silent because I'm like, well, I'm the one who didn't put in more of the
No.
money, and her husband's kind of involved in this. And so I don't know what to say. And it actually came down to me having to have I took the husband out for a cup of coffee and we sat down and I said, I got to talk to you. And when I laid it all out, he was like, Nicole, I think that's the best idea you've come up with. And basically it was
Really?
to make her a silent partner.
Oh
And
wow.
and he's like, and I totally agree with you. He goes, I see it. And he goes, and you have my
Wow.
full support. And I'm like, okay. And I said, I want to try it, but if it doesn't work, because I'm really worried that she won't be able to be silent,
Yeah.
maybe then it's time to go our separate ways. And I feel really
Mhm.
bad because I know you, he goes, Nicole, I've already considered the money a wash anyway. Don't worry about it. He goes, you got to do what's right. And so that was,
That's amazing.
it took a lot of courage to have that conversation. But once I did, I was like, why did I wait so long?
Right. Oh my gosh. I know. I
Yeah.
know.
And
I feel like that's so true. Is the only thing that, you know, I I don't like the word regret necessarily, but I think the only thing that I've regretted is waiting so long every time, you
or the
know?
things we haven't done. It's how much
Yes.
time we took to do it, or it's the things we haven't
Yes.
done. That's where regret
Yes.
lies. So I'm
Yeah.
I'm so glad you're saying this. And so you have the courage to finally exit the company to do what
Mhm.
you knew was in your best interest. Did you have a big struggle there? Was it hard for you, like, to get at, was there any pushback or, challenging you on your decisions?
I think there was definitely challenges of exiting. I think it's hard, when you're trying to leave something and the person doesn't really want that, and you're definitely in a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it can trigger all kinds of things for that other person, right? Um, and so it was not it was not fun to have to go through that process because I just kept saying this, it's just time and time for me to go do something else. And, then fears and,
You don't know
all
exactly
things come
what you're
in.
going to do next,
Well,
right?
and I had started writing down in my journal, the word glow with an E, like for a year and a half. And there was many different iterations in that time period about what it was. And so it took me some time, but I think I had to kind of mentally get through leaving in order to really be able to see more clearly what it is that I
Yeah.
wanted to build. I mean, luckily, it was becoming more clear before I left, and harder to articulate and things at the time. But I felt like I was being encouraged down the right path,
Path.
of just kind of keep going. You're getting
Yeah.
closer. You're getting closer.
You don't know
Um,
exactly what that path fully looks like. You don't know the full map. You just know this
right.
is the right direction. I just don't know where exactly it's going. It's,
Yes.
and so for the audience, so that they understand, you've now gone through 3 divorces, but,
Yep.
and they're big ones. They're not small ones. They're big ones. And this happens a lot because things happen in threes, don't they? They do happen in threes. However, the universe, or as I would say, the co-creation of our souls in the universe, love to challenge us just a little bit more to make sure
Right.
that we've got
Yes.
the lesson. Do you fully understand and are you fully embracing what you're meant
Yeah.
to embrace? Because it didn't end there, did it?
No. Right. No. There's always challenges, and I think that so much of it is reinforcing, you know, you've done all this work. Do you really believe this exploration to self? Do you really believe that you're worthy? Do you really believe that um, people want to hear from you or to hear your words or see you or, things like that. So there was a lot still to do after
Mhm.
that. It definitely was. And I remember distinctly going to this very sacred place that I've gone many times that has a labyrinth whenever I'm feeling like I need stillness and nature and, kind of some divine wisdom. And I just remember saying, are you kidding me? Like another challenge, another obstacle. I mean, haven't I figured this out? Haven't I been through enough? And, it was almost like in writing that in my journal, it was almost like this, kind of giggle. Like it's you're never really done, right?
No.
There's always more. There's always another layer. There's always a thing. And so, but I remember sitting there after writing all this down and having that kind of like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I have the strength to go through one more, challenge right now or whatever. But also this kind of supportive, yes, you can. And, what's this lesson telling you? And, learn from it. Don't waste the opportunity to learn from this next challenge. And so ironically, I had another one of those moments last Friday, and I I I think I had a better response because all of a sudden I felt like I was going down this negative spiral. Like two things happened. And I mean, my mind blew it so far out of proportion, and I just spiraled down, down, down into low self-worth, low, all the things, back to those really deep wounds that I've been working on so hard. And it took me about an hour to like kind of fall. And then I thought, wait a minute, I know how to help myself. And I grabbed my journal and I canceled my meetings and I was like, okay, I'm gonna go to the labyrinth. I'm gonna go sit outside. Luckily it wasn't this hot. I'm gonna go, really take my shoes off, sit in the dirt, just be in nature and just breathe, and it's going to be okay. And then if I get called to go into the labyrinth, I'll go into the labyrinth. And it was another one of those moments where, just in settling and calming and going through a process that was familiar to me that I know is always helpful. And sometimes I don't allow myself to do those things, but I did, and I allowed myself, and I went there, and within a couple of hours, I could breathe. I mean, I could feel and I could see through all the things that were making me spiral. And I could see things with a different lens, and I could see, the optimism and the positivity about what's really happening. And so it was an amazing thing, but I was so grateful that I could, in that, because sometimes when you're in the darkness, all you can see is darkness.
Mhm.
And for
Well,
me,
and not only that, the illusions of the darkness, like
yeah,
all
it's like
all of the
everything.
things that are moving, the shadows, everything, like it's yeah.
Yeah. So it was nice to be able to, you know, like have that presence, even if it was just for a moment to be like, journal, labyrinth, nature, go. You know, it was, it wasn't, it didn't take me very long to say, I don't have to stay in this. I can go reclaim, my
Y-
own power.
Do you
So
know
it
what's
was,
so amazing about the labyrinth is that it offers you the opportunity to get lost so that you can then be found.
yes. And it's so I don't know. There's so many powerful moments, but for me, the first time one of my shamans recommended it to me, and I said, a labyrinth, I feel like that'll even add more pressure because I don't have to make choices. And she's like, no, no, no. The labyrinth, there's one way in and one way out. And so you don't have to make choices. That's the point. All you have to do is put one step in front of the other, one foot in front of the other, and just be. And just, that's it. That's all you have to do. And so, I've often used it to, basically stop my monkey brain from getting in the way of what's trying to get through to me, and just being able to listen and tap into my soul, the subconscious, the universe, the collective, all of it, and just be present with that. And by me focusing, and I always do, I always look down and I just kind of one foot in front of the other, that's it. And I remembered about maybe 5 minutes in, so about a 20-minute in and 20-minute out if you did it all kind of at a medium pace. But I remember being 5 minutes in and my mind was like, you don't have time for this. You're not even halfway through. And it was this weird, I'm like, what? I don't know where I am in the labyrinth. I know I'm over here and I'm pretty sure I'm not even halfway, but I don't even really care. But it was almost like these thoughts were coming in to try to stop me from doing what I knew would ultimately give me that clarity and the
Mhm.
calm that I was looking for. So our brains are very powerful.
The ego does not like you
Whew,
to do things out of the ordinary. It does not want you to
right.
find your way away from separateness back to,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
The ego, and the ego is tricky. The ego is sneaky. It can come in different
Yes,
voices that you think is like, oh.
I know. I know. It's very hard.
So when you were, you know, before Glow actually came to be, you had to like you were divorced from your husband, you divorced your family, you divorced the business, um but your ex-husband still posed a problem for you.
Yes. Yes. And I think it was, so it was, I would say we divorced the first time. I mean, which meant we were, legally done and all of that. But it was almost, the universe saying, I think you didn't really learn the lesson because you gave up really easily. I basically was so exhausted by the fighting, the process, everything. I pushed everything to the middle of the table and I said, just take it all. I'll start over. I'll do. And frankly, it's the same thing that I did with my parents. I was like, you don't have to pay for anything. I just want to go. I'll take care of it myself. In my mind, I was like, you've done this before. You can do it again. You just need to be free. You've got to go. You've got to go figure this out. And, um, but yet he just kept coming back. It wasn't over, even though in my mind it was over. And I was trying to find a new balance of I'm now a single mom and, I have a different, I don't know, a whole different thing to learn here. And I thought that was it. And it really wasn't because I did not really stand up for myself. I didn't go through the process because I gave up because it was too hard, or I gave up because of the legal fees, or all these different things. And that really wasn't the point. The point was that I wasn't standing up to him.
Mm-hmm.
I did everything to get out, which was a great first step, but he just kept coming back. And it took, two, I'd have to think about it. There had to have been a third one in there since everything happens in threes. But there was within a week's time, this was maybe 2 years, 2 or 3 years after the first divorce with him. He attacked me in the high school parking lot when we were doing an exchange with our kids. And then uh, after one of our other kids' choir concerts or something, verbally was attacking me after that. And I thought, what am I doing? Why am I still allowing this kind of behavior? And the kids were hysterical and, it was just, it was causing all of us so much pain.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember just being in tears, and I called my attorney and I was explaining what happened. And, and he just said, he's a very calm man. And he said, "Are you done yet?" And I said, "What do you mean?" I said, we're divorced, everything else. And he's like, "No." He said, "You gave him joint custody. You gave him all of these things, but you need to be able to make decisions for the kids, because you can be rational. You can be, you know, you can put the kids' interests above all else and all of these things." And so we ended up going back to court and ended up in a 3-day trial that was horrifying, but I won. And in 2 days, I was on the stand for 2 out of the 3 days. And after the first day, the judge, I'm sitting there thinking, she's not going to believe me. She's not going to believe me. So I went at it I had these huge binders of all this evidence, all this stuff documented that he was putting us through. And I just took a business approach to it. I was like, I just need to be very methodical and show the data, because I didn't want to go in and start pointing fingers and blaming and everything else. I just want to say, I just want to be able to make decisions for my kids where I don't have to have all this extra layer. And so, and by the end of the first day, the judge was so disgusted and so angry about what had been going on all this time. It actually made me feel good that someone else could see that
Mm-hmm.
I am not an angry ex-wife. I just don't want to be treated this way.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think going through that process and having to relive and tell story after story and the evidence and everything, and that was probably the most public that I've been, because even after we divorced, I would never have gone on this podcast and say I was in an abusive marriage. Never. Just like, oh, we just ended things, and, it was bad, but, didn't really get into it. And so it took me up until a couple years ago, actually, where I was giving a speech about basically connecting back with yourself and learning how to align and glow. And it was the first time I said out loud in public to a whole room that I had been in an abusive marriage. And my business partner was in the audience, and she just started crying and I started crying. And it was just like this weird, release of just, I don't have to hide it anymore. And I don't say it to, to be negative towards him or anything else. It's fact. And I'm trying to share my story so that, to the extent other people who have said to me, you just always looked like you had it all together. You were always doing this and this and this, and you had all these titles and accolades and all this stuff. And I would have never guessed you were in so much pain and everything else. And it's like, I don't want people to think that what is being seen as the real story. I want people to know the whole story, because maybe it will help them.
Yeah.
Maybe it will help give them the courage to get out of something or to realign with themselves or something like that. So this has been a very new part of my journey, saying it out loud, because I think I'm always a little bit nervous about, will there be backlash or, something like that. And for the longest time, I said it was to protect my kids, but my kids are now older. I don't think they're in denial about what they had witnessed and things like that. We don't hide it as much anymore.
Yeah.
But I think it's still really hard for them.
Of course. But you don't want there to be any denial around what is, so that it
Totally.
doesn't happen to them, like,
Right.
that could be the case if we're just like, well, let's just not talk about it, and
Right.
let's just move on and forget about it. But look at where that got you, in a sense that you had to face it again. And It reminds me of that Julia Roberts movie. I love it so much. That old one, like Sleeping with the Enemy, where she was with that abusive, narcissistic husband, right? And the only way for her to escape was to fake her own death. And that was her easy way out, right? Well, I mean, it wasn't easy, but it was her easier way out. But eventually something caught up, right? He saw the ring, or he found the ring, and eventually she had to face and really choose her. And it feels like, a lot of us go through these things the much way you went through this with your ex-husband and having to go into the court system again. And I think this is a very common theme that all of us face on our journey when it comes to confronting the thing we don't want to confront, but is ultimately in between our purpose and our destiny.
Right. It's very hard.
You can't get around it. You got to go through it.
No, exactly. And to your point, there will continue to be obstacles or things in your path until you get past that one, and then there'll be something else. But
thank you
really
for
hard.
sharing. And I know that was not easy. I know it's never easy. And anyone who asks to share their story, whether it's publicly on a podcast like this, or even just in front of some people, it's really, to speak your truth carries a reverberation that hits your heart. And all of a sudden, all these emotions are finally released because of, you don't have to hold it in anymore. And it's like, there's permission slip to finally let go and to finally really truly be seen. And it's just, you're letting go of a very heavy bag. And I think that's beautiful. But what's so incredible that was gifted as your reward, for really kind of facing all of this, is what you've built through your company, GLOWE. And I'd love to kind of get into that so my audience understands, because what I love, and, sometimes, when you're on the spiritual journey, you'll detach from the world, which is, I think, part of the journey of your soul's evolution. Is you'll detach from society in some way, detach from the consensus, detach from what you should be doing, whether it's your family, your job, all of the above, your friends, who knows, live in a completely different country, off the grid. But at some point, you do need to reintegrate. That's part of the soul evolution, is to now reintegrate everything you've learned. And sometimes when you've been out of it for so long, you don't realize everything that's going on behind the scenes. Well, I say behind the scenes just because you've chosen to kind of leave the scene. And I think there's a lot more transforming in the business world than people realize.
Yes, agreed. Yes, it started to, what I really started to see and feel is really more of a feeling. It just kept growing in me that, there's all of these movements happening for a reason, right? And to ignore them or to think that it's a one-off or whatever, I started to see about 15 years ago, when I really started working a lot with millennials in multi-generational families, which are complex systems to say the least. And, the millennials were saying, I don't want to go the same path as my parents. I want purpose and meaning, and I want to find my own path, and I want to explore this or that. And they would say to me, they'd say, everyone is telling me to find my purpose, and I have no idea how to even start with that. And I had begun my process, but I was nowhere near where I am today to be able to say, oh, here's some ideas. But also I was in an environment where, working with the ultra affluent multi-generational families, there was kind of this line where I did keep my spiritual side of my healing journey, and frankly, my divorce, for a while. I kept that kind of private. So I was starting to see these things pop up, millennials and Gen Zs want something different. I'm listening to my peers and older generations complain about their businesses can't run because these people don't want to work. And so I'm starting to like hear all these things. And then, we've got, I think, work from home and remote work. I mean, it started well before the pandemic, and the pandemic just exacerbated it for everybody. But, it's that notion of, if I can't see you and if you're not in the seat, then I can't trust that you're actually doing the work. And then, there was just all these things. And I thought, ooh, we have a massive transformation happening right now. And it's not going to stop. It's not going to go away. And so, and we also at the same time have this massive uprising of people connecting with their own selves, their spirituality, exploring things. We've got the rise of the psychedelic movement. I mean, we have all these things of people finally looking at different modalities of healing and all of these things. And that's not going away either. And yet the people that are, exploring some of those things, like me, they were doing it on the down low.
Yeah.
They would go and work on it, and then they would come back and then they would put themselves in their box for their corporate job or whatever. And I felt like the millennials and the Gen Zs were going to be like, oh, no, we're not doing that. We're going to show up as one person. So I just kept seeing all of these major collisions, getting closer and closer to happening. And it was like, oh, wait, I can help bridge that because I've done that. I went through that journey. I went through that discovery of self, all the healing involved in that, the reintegration, as you say. And I'm now saying, this is me and I'm doing this, and I can sit with any business leader and talk strategy and results and process and and revenue and all the things. And I care about them as an individual human, and I care about their personal journey and their personal transformation. And they don't have to sacrifice themselves until they retire. They don't have to burn themselves out. They don't have to allow themselves to get sick and disconnect from happiness until they reach some number or some achievement or something else. And I just feel like I'm a bridge to helping people see that you can. And I'm just so grateful that I'm not the only person talking about it. I just read an article a few hours ago about how businesses are being urged, and now there's data around the more successful businesses are the ones that are embracing personal transformation and bringing that into the workplace. And I'm like, yes, okay, this is great for Glow, because we want people to show up as their whole selves.
Yeah.
We want people to identify with the purpose of a company that's super clear, and they want to be attached to it, and they want to bring their gifts.
Mm-hmm.
And they want to show up and get the results for that company because they're committed. And it's very possible. We're seeing it all the time, but it's not quite mainstream yet. I was happy to read this article in Forbes, but it's starting to bubble up and get out there. But there is this oneness between, businesses are just designed to achieve a certain goal with a group of people. And so, I mean, at its simplest form, it's like, I want to do this, and these are the people that are going to help me do that. And whether it's providing a good or a service, it's that simple. But if you don't have people, you really don't have a business.
No, yeah.
And even if you're just one person, it still relies on a business, still is driven by people.
Mm-hmm.
And so this oneness, this, showing up as your true self and figuring out what your gifts really are, so that you can figure out, I mean, like for me, sitting and doing accounting work behind, on a desk all day, every day, and not interacting with people was never going to work long term. That was never going to work. And so the sooner we can help people figure out, number one, what their gifts and talents are, and number two, what they really want, the better off everyone will be. And then there's all the things like, how do you communicate? And there's a lot to work on in the business systems that I think have been kind of broken for a while, but we've just kind of patched it together, because it's the way that the system was designed. And I was saying to someone earlier today, I had read some article about how when Henry Ford made the decision for his company, which was a huge company at the time, and he was very well regarded as a leader, he changed to a 5-day work week. And that was a massive transformation in the business industry to say, we're going to go to a 5-day work week. And I think that, in addition to all these other movements, we're having things like, well, what is a work week? How do we define a work week? Is it a 4-day work week? So there's all these things that are happening, but at the end of the day, if we can just come back down to basics, we have real extreme clarity about who our business is and what we're trying to achieve, like for real, what we're trying to achieve. And then who do we need and doing what, by when, to align the people and the people's energy to achieve those results. It's an amazing thing. And when they're happy, when I'm doing what I love to do, my energy is so different. I'm so different than when I'm doing something that I really don't like to do.
Yeah.
So the more that we can get people aligned, the better off everyone is.
Yeah. Instead of losing your life force, you're generating more life force, right? So it's
Totally.
like you're in that constant co-creation phase of like, it's just generating itself.
Right.
It feeds itself.
Right.
So you're not
Right.
you're not feeding the machine, so to speak.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that that's where we've gotten kind of lost in that business is all about, hitting revenue targets and all of these things. And it's kind of like the businesses have lost that connection to their soul, right? I mean, you started a business for a reason, or someone started the business for a reason and it's evolved or what have you, but there's still a soul of a business. So how do we reconnect with that soul? And then how do we connect the people with themselves so that they can align? I mean, it's powerful work, but I'm so passionate about it. And I feel like it's the right time right now for people who are struggling with
I love it. I love
these
that you're
issues.
doing that work with businesses and helping to kind of bridge the gap between the personal, spiritual side of things and then the business side, because they truly do all go hand in hand, like at the highest level. And that's at the highest level, right? Like when you think about just someone's physical health, that's why companies will start to pay for your insurance, is because they need you to be healthy. They need you to be doing the work. But now we're kind of evolved past the mental and the emotional. Now we're getting to that spiritual realm, where it's like, okay, this is where it all is the root, this is where it all matters. And it's like, if you're not aligned spiritually with something, that means your soul's not aligned with it. And when someone's soul isn't aligned with something, it eats away at you. It feels like it's just gnawing at you. And it's like you'd want to drag your feet, and it's just awful. And so having people in your company that feel aligned with their soul, and that their soul is aligned with your business's soul, and like, it's like magic happens. Magic really does start to happen.
It really does. And it's so, I keep telling people, I'm like, I feel like this is such an honor to do this work. Like, it's really, I think it's my ultimate gift to myself and others, right? I went through all of the things that I went through, and then this light bulb turned on about how I could really help people in business and, apply my personal journey and my business journey and bring it together for someone else in a, hopefully it doesn't take 2 decades for them to see the same results I did, and I don't think they will, but it's such a huge gift. Like, I truly, every time I meet with someone, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is such a gift to be able to help you with this transformation personally and in business. And when we bring them together, it's so powerful.
I know. And
I'm just glad more people are talking about it.
I know. I love it. And I think there's so many terminologies that are becoming so much more mainstream than they were just even a few years ago. which is really cool to see. And just people are starting to get it. They're starting to embrace it. It's become, and it takes a time. Things like this do take
Yeah.
time to permeate, not
Yes.
just the consciousness, but the understanding, like the grasping of something. And
Mhm.
so I see that happening, and I love to see it because, sometimes, and this is the unfortunate part of staying unintegrated, with back in the world or society or your jobs or whatever. And how you do that is going to be completely unique to every individual. But too often I see that when you kind of detach from the consensus and start to individuate yourself and go through that process, very important process, that it's hard to come back in and learn how to bring forth that new you and then be a leader in some capacity. It doesn't mean you're
Yeah.
leading big groups or whatever, but you're leading as an example. At the
Yeah.
very minimum, you're leading as an example of living a true, authentic, life and of self. And that is the true gift and the mission of everyone here, is to truly honor who you are, but do it involved in society, because long gone are the days of living on a monastery or living like,
Right.
as a monk in a cave, or,
Exactly.
like that's not
Yes.
what we're here to do. We didn't sign up
No.
for that. So as with everything, there are more challenges, and the big challenge is how do you integrate it and bring it forward? And because that's where it's like, people are going to question you, but also
Right.
people are going to find you. And so
Yes.
you got to be open to that.
Yeah. No, that is so true. I've had so many people say to me over the last 3 years that, well, because they kind of look at me like, I think I understand. And then they'll try to put it in a bucket, like, oh, you're a consultant. It's like, well, yes, technically speaking, that's true. And we have a very different philosophy. And they'll say, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I get it. You're pink and, you have all this, you're all women and, things like that. I'm like, well, yes, okay. That's also true. But I think it's because it's such a new idea. It's such a new concept of this integration of personal and business transformation being very much aligned. And they can happen together to make the biggest impact. And it's hard to be out on the forefront, I guess, with your thoughts and, trying to lead people to this. But there's a lot of, I was saying to someone yesterday, I said, there's a lot of people who are very glow curious. They don't get it. They're like glow with an E. I'm like, yes, the E is for energy, because energy is so important in everything. And, they at least give me a little bit of grace. Like, I'm going to listen. I'm really curious. I'm not quite sure that I get it. And that's okay.
Yeah.
I just keep saying, I'm like, whenever something comes around and, they think of us again, hopefully maybe then it's the right time. It's not the right
Mhm.
time for everybody. And there's, always early adopters and things like that. But it is very frustrating sometimes because I just want to say, we could just help so many people.
I
Why don't we have
know.
a line out our door? But we'll get there.
Yeah. Well, the ones who are brave enough to take a little risk and to, you know, really kind of go about things in a different way, because the old way isn't fully working. And it's not to say that there aren't certain things from the old way that can stay, but it's like,
Exactly.
we got to start integrating some more the new
Yes.
future kind of ways of doing things,
Yes.
because the newer souls, so to speak, that are growing up on this planet are having very different ideas and different ways of going about it, and that's natural. That happens every single decade. There's like new generations
Totally.
coming forward. This
Totally.
is nothing new, and they're always going to be forward thinking. They're always going to be trying to push the envelope and push the boundaries, and that's how we evolve as a society.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's
Yeah.
so much fun. I think that the news tends to skew us. I try not to read too much of it because it's just so negative, but to have awareness that, all the things that are happening that are being perceived as negative, it's like they are all happening. And there's also all of this opportunity happening as well. Because look at how people are responding to things. Look at things that have evolved and opened up as a result of, these things happening. So I don't know, there's just all these different forces at work right now. And I think it's all leading us down a really great path.
Yeah. Yeah. And change doesn't happen without discomfort at the very minimum.
Right.
So you
Right.
gotta learn to get uncomfortable.
Yes,
Okay. Or I should say, you got to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And
absolutely.
I think that too, when we look at how things are changing, and I always say this, like, listen, whatever way you want to perceive this world and what's going on in it is totally your prerogative. This is why we have
Yep,
many lenses. This is why we have called the word called
absolutely.
perspective. However, how you choose to live in this reality is going to be based off of your level of consciousness, and your level of consciousness is going to be tied to your perception. And if you're too busy focusing on the problems, then you can't ever get into the higher states of consciousness where the solution is found. And so there has to come a time where you say, you know what? I'm going to focus on solutions, which means I have to kind of depart the problems, or at least constantly
Yes,
perceiving them, so I can be open to newer ways.
right, right.
Mm-hmm.
That's so true and such a good perspective. I think that, and I know you had these conversations with people too, that when you start to talk about, higher levels of conscious and, some of these things, people, get a little bit afraid again because it's unknown and it's uncomfortable. And, when people open up to the possibility and all of that, it is such a beautiful thing to watch. Like, I mean, it's a beautiful thing to experience, but it's also, I've noticed and I've seen in this work that we've done just in the last few years that, as we take people where we are and we introduce new things, we take a step and then we take another step. And then you get to this point where you embrace this new way. You embrace this way of focusing on the solution and how to really expose yourself to the solutions versus, you know, getting mired in the problem and things like that. It's really awesome, but it's going to take a lot of us to, create that space and that awareness so that people can start to shift away from focusing on this to focusing on what's possible and possible solutions
Yeah.
forward.
I
Fascinating.
I was at an event last week, a networking event, that was all investment, like is all investment, finance, wealth management, all of that. And I was invited there by a friend. He's like, I just think you're going to meet some really cool people here. And I'm like, okay. And so, I got there and he was like, start talking. And I'm like, okay. So,
Oh my
here I am, a
God.
little bit out of my element,
I
because I'm
love
used
it.
to talking to people
Yeah.
who are really into all like the
Right.
stuff that we're talking about. And
Yes.
so I owned it though. I was like, I am who I am, and I'm just going to let people decide for themselves if they want to talk to me or not, and
Yeah.
I'll tell you, there wasn't one person who didn't want to like go down this pathway of what it means to know who I am and what's my purpose and
Yeah.
self-transformation and plant medicine and all this kind
Yes.
of stuff, the psychedelics, like every single person I talked to, as soon as I
Yes.
said psychedelics, it was like the halo
Oh
of
yeah.
sun just like came, like
Yes.
I don't know, like the choir was singing, the angels were
Yeah.
singing, and it was like almost like they got a green light, like, oh, we can talk about this.
Right.
And it
Right.
was like they were hungry for it. Hungry. And it's like I came to the party carrying the one dish that everyone was secretly hungry for, but no one wanted to admit. It's like, oh, no one can know I want to eat that.
Yeah.
It's just like,
I
and
love
so it
that.
was so much fun. And that's why I want to say, like, what's so important, even like what we were talking about earlier, it's like when we're talking about integrating yourself back into the world to really showcase who you truly are and what your gifts are, you got to know you're going to come up against people who are just not going to get you. And they might even make fun of you,
Right.
But if you're not willing to take that risk, the people who need to find you won't ever be able to find you. And you got to take that risk.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. That's
because it's way more fun
sure.
when you finally do connect with the people that are meant to find you.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Yes. I know. And we've been saying that, we go through these waves where we get worried about the next client or whatever. And, luckily, because the team is all very glowy, we can remind each other. We're like, well, this is creating space for the right person. And, and it happens. And we always end up laughing. It's like, remember that meeting that we had where we were all super stressed out? And then, within a certain period of time. And so it's very true. I'm not surprised that you had that experience because, having been in that industry for 25 years, and now I'm kind of going back to it because they are definitely craving this type of transformation. It is very interesting. And I think there's been a couple of significant TV shows and things like that from the hedge fund space and the financial services space that's definitely elevated these experiences into something cool.
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised that you had that relation or that. I wish I could be there to observe.
Wow. I was like, this is so eye-opening. I had no idea. And it's just like I could have this like shit-eating grin on my face, that's how I felt the whole, like every cell in my body had this shit-eating grin on my face. And I'm just like, this is so cool. I literally was like one of the best nights of my whole month, and I just like, I love being surprised by people. I love being surprised by the world.
Totally.
And you gotta put yourself out there. So, and it's just, there's good and there's bad. But you gotta be willing to take both in order to have both, So, this has been so fun, Whitney. I'm so glad you came on the show. And, I can't wait till we do dinner again one night.
So fun.
So we can go deeper and deeper into all the things.
I know.
But okay, so let my audience know if they want to reach out to you, connect with you for any reason, where they can find you and what you've got going on.
Yes. So on LinkedIn, it's Whitney Kenter, Kenter, or you can follow us on GLOWE with an E, Connective. We're on LinkedIn, we're on Instagram, and that's our website as well. It's www.glowconnective.com, and I'll give you all that information, and would also love to see you subscribe to our newsletter. I send out a newsletter every Wednesday, and it's just a little spark of inspiration, hopefully, that connects with people. So come find us. It'd be great to have some more people from your audience.
Amazing. I love it. Well, I'm going to leave all the links for you guys in the description below so that you can easily connect with Whitney on all fronts. And guys, don't forget that if you are interested, the Forbidden Journey Retreat is at the end of September. If you want to come, their tickets are still available. I'd love to have you there. 28th of September, we'll be in Breckenridge, Colorado for 3 nights of complete self-transformation and upgrading and activating, and it's going to be fun. So I'd love to see you there. Links for all that are in the description below as well. I love you guys and have an incredible week. Thanks again for joining me for another show on the Enlighten Up podcast. I love you guys so much for all of your continued support. So remember to raise your vibe, find your tribe, and be open to the infinite possibilities held in the mysteries that surround us all. Thanks again for sharing the show with your family and friends. And if you're new to the show and you need to find out more information about me, please head on over to my website, NicoleFrolick.com, where you can join my newsletter. And please follow me on Instagram, Telegram, and YouTube. Keep your light bright, and I'll see you next week.